A millionaire falls in love with a virtual girlfriend, but when he meets her for the first time, he uncovers a shocking truth. Before starting the story, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Victor Campbell, CEO of the giant Campbell Innovations, was a man used to winning. His life revolved around billion-dollar deals and quick decisions, but at home there was one challenge he couldn't escape: his mother, Evelyn. "Victor, it's time you got married. You're a powerful man, but without a wife, your life is incomplete." Victor ignored the family pressures, but tired of the constant arguments, he took an unexpected step. He created an anonymous profile on a dating app. Introducing himself as Ethan, he avoided sharing any details of his real life. His goal was simple: silence Evelyn with the false promise that he was looking for someone. In the first week, most conversations felt superficial until he received a message from Luna. She had a sharp sense of humor and a captivating way of talking. Within days, their exchanges became frequent, evolving into long, late-night conversations. "You're different from anyone I've ever met, Luna," Victor typed. "Maybe because I'm not trying to impress anyone," she replied, adding a winking emoji. Luna, whose real name was Alice Harper, was a freelance graphic designer dreaming of working for a big company. Between projects and tight deadlines, her chats with Ethan became the highlight of her day. She felt a genuine connection, something she'd never experienced before. One evening, during their conversation, Ethan proposed something unexpected. "What do you think about meeting in person? It's time we turn these messages into something real." Alice hesitated. Meeting someone from the virtual world was risky, but her intuition told her Ethan was trustworthy. "Let's do it," she replied, her heart racing. Meanwhile, Victor, more excited than he would admit, picked a date for their meeting. It would be a quiet dinner, far from the prying eyes of the media. He wanted to meet her without the interference of his corporate world. What he didn't know was that fate had even more complex plans for the two. Alice Harper was ecstatic. Since graduating in graphic design, she had dreamed of working for a major company. When she received an email from Campbell Innovations inviting her for an interview, she couldn't believe it. This was her chance to change her life. She reviewed her portfolio dozens of times, making sure every project was flawless. Even with her meeting with Ethan scheduled for that evening, the interview became her priority. After all, landing that job meant finally moving out of the shadows of small freelance gigs that barely paid the bills. On the morning of the interview, Alice put on her favorite navy blue blazer, the one that exuded confidence. Looking at herself in the mirror, she repeated to herself, "You've got this." Meanwhile, in the luxurious office on the top floor of Campbell Innovations, Victor Campbell was reviewing the day's schedule. He had a series of important meetings, but one item in particular caught his eye: the interview with a new designer named Alice Harper. Victor rarely got involved in junior-level hires, but something about her name intrigued him. When his assistant, Rebecca, came in to confirm the schedule, he asked casually, "Harper, is she local?" "Yes, sir. Graduated with honors in design. She seems promising." Victor nodded, thoughtful. Something about that name stirred something within him, but he decided to ignore it. He had more pressing matters to deal with, like his meeting with Luna that evening. Later, Alice arrived at the impressive Campbell Innovations building, the heart of the city's technological innovation. The environment was intimidating: gleaming glass walls, hurried employees, and a security system straight out of a futuristic movie. "Name?" asked the security guard. "Alice Harper. I have an interview at 10. After checking her name, he directed her to the 20th floor. Alice took a deep breath as the elevator ascended, her heart pounding. When the doors opened, Rebecca greeted her with a professional smile. "The CEO will see you shortly. Please have a seat." Alice froze. The CEO? She had expected to be interviewed by a design manager, not the company's leader himself. Trying not to show her nerves, she nodded and sat in the elegant waiting area. Moments later, Rebecca opened the door to Victor's office. "Mr. Campbell, Miss Harper is here." Victor, standing with his back to the door, gazing at the city view, turned slowly. The moment his eyes met Alice's, they both froze. Alice swallowed hard, immediately recognizing Ethan. The man she had spoken with every night, who made her laugh and dream, was her future boss. Victor, on the other hand, felt the ground disappear beneath him. Luna, the woman who had captured his attention and broken through his defenses, was standing right in front of him. "Alice?" he said, his voice barely audible. Alice blinked, trying to process the situation. "Ethan?" "No." Her voice faltered as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The silence between them was deafening. Victor, usually composed, felt his mask slipping. He knew he needed to regain control of the situation. "Miss Harper," he finally said, adopting a professional tone, "please have a seat." Alice obeyed, though her heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. She had come in for an interview, but now she was face to face with the man who knew her most intimate secrets. Victor tried to maintain his composure, but his mind was in chaos. He wanted to talk to Alice as Ethan, but knew he couldn't. The situation was delicate, and one wrong move could jeopardize his position as CEO. "Let's begin," he said, flipping through Alice's portfolio. Alice answered his questions as professionally as possible, but the tension was unmistakable. Every word exchanged seemed loaded with meaning, as if they were walking on thin ice. After what felt like an eternity, Victor ended the interview. "Thank you, Miss Harper. We'll be in touch." Alice nodded and left the office quickly, feeling the weight of the situation. As soon as the elevator doors closed, her mind exploded with questions. How could he have hidden something so important? And now what? Victor, meanwhile, remained seated, staring at the door through which Alice had just exited. He knew he had to decide how to handle this unexpected turn of events. Alice walked through the city streets, still in shock. What was supposed to be a simple interview had turned into an emotional whirlwind. Ethan, the kind and funny man who made her smile, was Victor Campbell, the serious and controlling CEO of Campbell Innovations. She felt betrayed, but at the same time she knew it wasn't fair to judge him without understanding his reasons. In his luxurious office, Victor stared out at the horizon, his thoughts tangled. As a CEO, he was used to making calculated decisions, but nothing had prepared him for this. Luna, Alice, was real, and now the virtual world they had shared was colliding with the professional one. Victor knew he needed to act. He called Rebecca and asked her to bring Alice back to the office. Alice, still trying to process everything, received the call just as she was considering giving up any chance of working at the company. "Mr. Campbell would like to see you again," Rebecca said formally. Reluctantly, Alice returned to the building. Once she arrived, she was escorted straight to Victor's office. He was standing by the window, waiting for her. "Alice," he began, his voice calm but tense. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms, standing firm. "Go ahead." Victor took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I never planned for things to get to this point. I created the profile on the app because my mother insisted, but our conversations, they were real to me." Alice narrowed her eyes, analyzing his every word. "And what about me? Did you know who I was?" "No, not until today when you walked through that door," Victor replied, his gaze sincere. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, Alice let out a long sigh. "This doesn't change the fact that you're my boss now, and honestly, I don't know how to handle this." Victor nodded, understanding her dilemma. "Neither do I. But I want to make one thing clear. Our conversations, everything we shared, they were real." Alice shook her head, still confused, but something in his voice made her believe him. "Fine, but we need to keep things professional from now on." Victor agreed, though he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The next day, Alice officially started her job at Campbell Innovations. Despite the initial discomfort, she threw herself into her projects, determined to prove her worth. Victor, meanwhile, kept his distance. He tried to maintain his role as CEO, but he couldn't help the occasional glance toward the design department, where Alice worked diligently. During a design team meeting, Victor decided to personally review the progress on their projects. Alice was presenting her ideas when he walked into the room. The atmosphere instantly grew tense, but she held her composure and continued. "This concept aims to connect users through an intuitive interface, focusing on accessibility and clean design," Alice explained, pointing to the screen. Victor listened attentively and, at the end of the presentation, asked just one question. "Can you deliver this in a week?" Alice knew it was a tight deadline, but her determination was stronger. "Yes, I can." Victor nodded and the meeting ended. As everyone left the room, he approached her. "Alice, can we talk?" She hesitated but agreed. "Of course, Mr. Campbell." Victor frowned slightly at her formal tone but didn't comment. "I just wanted to thank you for your dedication. I know the situation is unusual, but I hope we can work together without it affecting our performance." Alice looked at him for a moment before replying, "I hope so too." The following days were intense. Alice worked tirelessly to meet the deadline, while Victor struggled to balance his feelings and responsibilities. The tension between them was undeniable, but neither allowed themselves to show more than necessary. Finally, the deadline arrived, and Alice delivered the project on time. During the final presentation, Victor surprised everyone by publicly praising her work. "Excellent work, Miss Harper. This is the level of innovation we strive for at Campbell Innovations." Alice felt her cheeks flush but thanked him professionally. After the meeting, Rebecca handed her a note. "Meet me on the rooftop at 6 p.m. We need to talk." Ville. Alice debated whether she should go, but her curiosity and the need to resolve the situation drove her to the rooftop. When she arrived, Victor was already there, gazing at the city lights. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said without turning around. "I'm here." "What do you want?" Victor finally turned, his eyes fixed on hers. "I just want you to know that, despite everything, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable here. If needed, I can request to transfer you to another team." Alice crossed her arms, analyzing his words. "That won't be necessary. I can keep things professional." Victor nodded, but his expression revealed something else. "Then let's make this work." Alice simply nodded, sensing this was only the beginning of something far more complicated. The next days at Campbell Innovations tested Alice's patience. While determined to stay professional, it was impossible to ignore Victor's constant presence. He attended meetings, reviewed every detail of the project, and always asked pointed questions. In the third meeting that week, Victor interrupted Alice mid-presentation. "This concept needs to be bolder. Where are the ideas that surprise us?" he asked firmly, his gaze critical. Alice took a deep breath, holding back her irritation. "The goal here is to deliver functionality and aesthetics. Straying too far from that compromises the user experience." Victor stared at her for a few seconds before replying, "Redo it with more options. I want something different on my desk by tomorrow." The silence in the room was palpable. Alice nodded calmly, though inside she felt her frustration rising. When the meeting ended, she left quickly, ignoring her colleagues' glances. Back at her desk, Alice began working, but Victor's words echoed in her mind. The man she had shared late-night messages with felt like a completely different person now. Later, while reviewing sketches, she heard footsteps approaching. It was Sarah, a teammate. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her expression kind. "I'm fine. Just trying to handle our dear CEO's expectations." Alice replied sarcastically. Sarah laughed. "He's demanding, but I've heard that when he likes someone's work, he's a strong ally." Alice sighed. "I hope that's true." Meanwhile, in Victor's office, he stared at the weekly report, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew he had been hard on Alice, but he thought it was necessary to maintain boundaries between his personal and professional lives. Even so, part of him felt guilty. Rebecca entered with a reminder. "Mr. Campbell, the design team's performance report is ready. Would you like me to bring it?" Victor shook his head. "Not now. Leave me alone for a moment." Rebecca left, and Victor picked up his phone. The urge to message Alice, or rather Luna, was almost irresistible. He wanted to explain, but he knew he shouldn't. The next day, Alice delivered the revised project on time. Victor reviewed the sketches in silence, and when finished, simply murmured, "Much better. Continue down this path." Alice felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. She knew she needed to keep her head up and prove she could handle any challenge. That night, as Alice reviewed more details of the project, she received a message from Ethan. "How was your day? You seem tired lately." She stared at the screen, feeling a twinge of irritation. After hesitating, she replied, "I had to deal with a demanding boss, but nothing I can't handle." Ethan responded quickly, "I'm sure you'll handle it. You're amazing." Alice closed her eyes for a moment, trying to separate the man who supported her online from the boss who pushed her hard at work. The next day, something unexpected happened. During lunch, Victor was in the company cafeteria, a rare occurrence. Alice walked in and tried to avoid eye contact but ended up sitting near him. As she ate, Sarah approached and started chatting loudly about the project. "Alice, you're doing great. I bet even the grumpy boss is impressed," Sarah said, laughing. Alice let out a nervous laugh, but Victor heard it and frowned. He said nothing, but it was clear he had heard. After lunch, Victor called Alice to his office. "Miss Harper, can you explain the jokes during lunch?" he asked in a serious tone. Alice felt her face flush. "It was nothing, sir. Just a casual conversation with a colleague. Make sure your team knows that jokes like that are unacceptable in the workplace," Victor said curtly. Alice left his office with trembling hands, feeling unfairly treated. Later that night, Alice vented to Ethan. "My boss called me into his office today because of a joke at lunch. He's unbearable. Maybe he's just trying to maintain order," Ethan replied. Alice scoffed, irritated. "Maintain order? All he does is criticize and set impossible deadlines. Have you considered that he might have a good reason for that?" Ethan asked. Alice paused, surprised by the response. "I don't know. But still, he should learn to be more human." On the other side of the screen, Victor read the message with a heavy sigh. He wanted to explain himself, but knew it would only complicate things further. In the following days, Alice and Victor kept their interactions minimal and strictly professional. However, the tension between them was evident, and the entire team could feel it. Alice's first week at Campbell Innovations was intense. Between tight deadlines and Victor's constant pressure, she barely had time to breathe. Even so, she knew this was her chance to stand out and couldn't let the demands of her boss shake her focus. The next Monday, Victor gathered the design team to present a new project, the redesign of the company's main app. It was an ambitious task, with an unrealistic deadline of 2 weeks. "This is the most important project of the quarter," Victor announced in his usual authoritative tone. "I need everyone to give it their best." He scanned the room and stopped at Alice. "Miss Harper, you'll be responsible for the main visual concept. Are you ready?" Alice felt the weight of responsibility but answered firmly, "Yes, sir." As soon as the meeting ended, Alice dove into work. For hours, she sketched and adjusted details, determined to impress. However, Victor's critiques came quickly. "This still isn't what I'm looking for, Miss Harper," he said, reviewing her initial concepts. "Refine the lines and focus more on user experience." Alice swallowed her frustration and went back to the drawing board, but the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. Meanwhile, Victor watched from a distance, fighting the urge to help her. He knew he was being demanding, but he couldn't let personal feelings interfere with work. "Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand." Now let's get back to the story. That night, Alice stayed at the office late. The team had already left, but she needed to make adjustments to deliver something satisfactory the next day. When she looked at the clock, she realized it was past 9. Suddenly, the office door opened, and Victor walked in with firm steps. "Still here?" he asked, surprised. "Yes. I want to make sure the project meets your expectations," Alice replied, not taking her eyes off the monitor. Victor stepped closer, looking at her work over her shoulder. "It's better," he admitted, "but you need to rest. Working endlessly won't guarantee good results." For a moment, Alice felt the tension ease. "It's funny hearing that from you, considering you never stop working." Victor gave a slight smile but quickly returned to a serious tone. "I'm the CEO. It's expected that I keep this pace. And I'm expected to deliver something perfect, right?" Alice retorted, turning to face him. They stared at each other for a few seconds until Victor stepped back. "I'll get some coffee. You won't finish this without an extra dose of energy." Alice was surprised by the gesture but gave a brief smile and thanks. The next day, Alice presented the updated visual concept in a meeting. The room fell silent as Victor analyzed every detail. After a few minutes, he turned to the team and declared, "Excellent work, Miss Harper. This is the kind of innovation I want to see." Alice felt a wave of relief and pride. For the first time, she realized she might be able to handle Victor's high expectations. However, not everything went smoothly. During lunch break, Alice overheard some colleagues talking. "Looks like the boss has a special interest in the new designer," one of them said, laughing. "Did you see how he praised her work? That's rare for him." Alice ignored the comments but couldn't help replaying their words in her mind. She knew she'd need to maintain her professional demeanor to avoid any speculation. Later, in the office, Victor called Alice in to discuss final adjustments to the project. His tone was lighter than usual. "Have a seat, Alice. I want to go over a few ideas to elevate the concept even further." She noticed his change in behavior but decided to focus on the conversation. During the discussion, she realized that, despite his strictness, Victor was brilliant and had a clear vision of what he wanted. "This could work," she said after considering some of the modifications. "I agree, and if you need support, let me know. Don't hesitate to ask for help." Alice was surprised but simply nodded. As she walked back to her desk, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Victor wasn't just demanding, he was also detail-oriented and deeply committed, something she admired, even if she didn't want to admit it. That evening, Alice received another message from Ethan. "How's the project coming along?" She hesitated before responding. "It's going well. My boss finally approved my work, but he's still a mystery to me." On the other side of the screen, Victor smiled faintly. "Maybe he's just trying to be fair." Alice laughed as she read the message. "If that's fairness, I never wanted to be judged again." Victor typed a response but hesitated before sending it. He knew the line between his roles as Ethan and Victor was becoming increasingly blurred, and he needed to be careful. The next day, Alice and Victor crossed paths in the hallway, and he did something unexpected. "Miss Harper, thank you for the extra effort. Your work has exceeded expectations." Alice was momentarily speechless but quickly replied, "Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I'll keep giving my best." Victor nodded and walked away, but the small compliment was enough to make Alice feel she was in some way earning her place. The week flew by, leaving Alice exhausted but satisfied. The project was progressing well, and she was starting to feel more confident at Campbell Innovations. Still, one thing nagged at her. Her relationship with Victor felt like a roller coaster. One moment, he was cold and critical, the next, kind and understanding. That Friday, Alice left the office a bit early, looking forward to her much-anticipated dinner with Ethan. She was excited to finally meet the man who had been her virtual companion for months. "Tonight will be the night everything makes sense," she murmured to herself as she chose a dress. While Alice was getting ready, Victor was reviewing an important report in his office. Investor pressure was mounting, and he knew the current project would be crucial for the company's future. He lost himself in the numbers until Rebecca entered. "Mr. Campbell, you have an emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. Victor frowned. It wasn't on the agenda. It was scheduled last minute. "Seems serious." Victor sighed, closing the report. He had other plans for the evening, but knew he couldn't ignore the board. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Alice arrived on time, but Ethan wasn't there. She asked for a table and waited, checking her phone occasionally. After half an hour with no word, her patience began to wear thin. Did he back out? She thought, feeling a mix of disappointment and frustration. She sent a short message. "Are you coming?" Victor, in the middle of the meeting, saw the notification but couldn't respond. Time slipped by, and when he finally got free, it was too late. He picked up his phone and saw Alice's message. "Sorry, something urgent came up. Can we reschedule?" Alice read the message with a heavy sigh. "Of course, as always," she muttered, closing the app. The next day, Alice arrived at the office still upset. Dinner had been the one thing she'd really been looking forward to, and now she felt like she'd wasted her time. To make things worse, Victor seemed colder and more distant than ever. During the team meeting, he pointed out minor flaws in her work, things she knew weren't worth mentioning. "Miss Harper, this detail needs to be revised. We can't compromise on quality," he said in an impersonal tone. Alice held back the urge to respond defensively. She just nodded and went back to work. At lunch, Alice ran into Sarah, who immediately noticed her gloomy mood. "What's wrong? You look like someone stole your favorite chocolate," Sarah joked. "Long story," Alice replied, not wanting to get into details. Sarah leaned in closer, clearly curious. "Does this have to do with the boss? I heard he's been giving you a hard time lately." Alice sighed and shook her head. "He's always tough, but I'm starting to think he's doing it on purpose." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Who knows? Maybe he's testing you, or maybe he's trying to push you to do better." Alice didn't answer. Instead, her thoughts drifted back to Ethan. Why had he canceled dinner? Why did it feel like both he and Victor were determined to complicate her life? That night, Alice vented to Ethan again. My day was awful. Honestly, I expected better from you. Ethan took a while to reply, but eventually wrote back. I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but I was caught up in something I couldn't avoid. You could have at least told me beforehand, Alice responded. On the other side of the screen, Victor felt the weight of her words. He knew he was treading on thin ice, but still replied, You're right. There's no excuse. Can I make it up to you? Alice hesitated before typing back, I don't know. We'll see. At the office, Victor was more pensive than ever. He knew he needed to redeem himself, but wasn't sure how to do it without making things even more complicated with Alice. The next morning, Victor walked into the design department unannounced. He stopped by Alice's desk and placed a report on it. Miss Harper, here's the detailed feedback on the project. Take your time to review it. Alice was surprised by his controlled tone but just nodded. Yes, sir? Before leaving, Victor paused and said something unexpected. And good work on the last presentation. You're on the right track. Alice blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. It wasn't much, but coming from him, it meant something. That night, Ethan sent another message. I'm still thinking of how to make it up to you. Any suggestions? Alice chuckled softly, feeling her irritation fade. Surprise me, she replied. Victor read the message and felt there might still be a chance to earn back Alice's trust, both as Ethan and as Victor. Alice was determined not to let either Victor or Ethan get under her skin. The past few days had been an emotional roller coaster, and she wanted to focus solely on her work. But that was easier said than done, especially with Victor constantly watching every detail of the project. That afternoon, during a team meeting, Alice presented a new design proposal for the app. Victor listened silently, his eyes fixed on each slide. When she finished, he paused for a moment before saying, It's close, but we need more visual impact on the homepage. Can you work on that? Alice nodded, keeping her tone steady. Of course, Mr. Campbell. Despite the professional exchange, Alice felt the tension rise with every interaction. After the meeting, as she walked back to her desk, Sarah pulled her aside. You're handling the boss really well, you know? Sarah said playfully. I'm just trying to survive, Alice replied with a sigh. Later that night, Alice got another message from Ethan. Have you decided how you want me to surprise you? She rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. I don't know, maybe a decent dinner? And this time, no cancellations. Ethan replied almost immediately. Deal. Let's do it right this time. Alice felt her heart skip a beat. Despite all the ups and downs, there was something about Ethan that made her want to give him another chance. The next day, Alice was focused on refining the project when she received an email from Victor. Meeting on the rooftop at 4 p.m. We need to discuss design details. She frowned. Meetings on the rooftop weren't typical, but she decided not to question it. At 4 p.m., Alice went up to the rooftop and found Victor already waiting. He was standing with his back to her, gazing out at the city below. Miss Campbell? She called cautiously. Victor turned around, and for a moment he seemed more relaxed than usual. Thank you for coming. I thought it would be better to talk in a less formal setting. Alice nodded, still wary. All right, about the design. Victor raised his hand, interrupting her. Before we start, I want to apologize if I've been too harsh lately. I know my critiques can seem excessive, but it's because I believe in your potential. Alice was taken aback by his sincerity. Thank you. It's just, sometimes it feels like nothing I do is ever enough. That's not true, Victor said, his eyes locked on hers. Your work has been exceptional. I want you to know that. Alice felt her heart tighten. Seeing Victor this human was rare, and it left her even more confused. That evening, Alice received another message from Ethan. Ready for our dinner tomorrow? She hesitated before replying. Yes, ready. Ethan replied with a smiling emoji, and Alice couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to finally meet him. The next day, the atmosphere at the office felt different. Victor seemed calmer, but still focused on the project. Alice, on the other hand, felt torn between her work and the anticipation of her dinner with Ethan. When the workday ended, Alice went straight home, eager to get ready. She chose a simple yet elegant dress and mentally reviewed everything she knew about Ethan. Arriving at the restaurant, she looked around, searching for him. Suddenly, her heart stopped. Victor Campbell was sitting at a nearby table, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was an elegant blonde woman, smiling as they talked. Alice felt a mix of confusion and anger. What was he doing here? And who was that woman? Trying to ignore his presence, she sat at a table farther away, waiting for Ethan to arrive. But as time passed, an uneasy feeling began to grow. Finally, Victor stood up and approached her. "Alice? What are you doing here?" She tried to stay calm, but her voice carried tension. "I'm waiting for someone." Victor frowned, but before he could respond, the blonde woman joined them. "Victor, who is this?" "A colleague," he replied quickly. Alice felt humiliation creeping in but maintained her composure. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Campbell." Victor hesitated but returned to his table. Alice, meanwhile, felt like coming here had been a mistake. She picked up her phone and saw a message from Ethan. "Sorry, I can't make it tonight." Alice stared at the screen in disbelief. Once again, Ethan had let her down. Leaving the restaurant, the cold night air seemed to match her mood. She felt trapped in an endless cycle of broken expectations and confusion. The next morning, Alice was more determined than ever to focus on work and forget about her personal complications. However, when she arrived at her desk, she found a note waiting for her. "We need to talk. Rooftop, today at noon." She recognized Victor's handwriting immediately and felt a wave of anxiety. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew this conversation could change everything. Alice hesitated before heading to the rooftop. Victor's note made it clear he had something important to say, but she wasn't sure what to expect. The confusion about Ethan and seeing Victor at the restaurant still weighed on her mind. Opening the rooftop door, she found him standing there, hands in his pockets, gazing at the city. He seemed lost in thought, but when he heard her footsteps, he turned immediately. "Thank you for coming, Alice," Victor said, his voice low and almost hesitant. "What do you want, Mr. Campbell?" she asked, crossing her arms. Victor took a step toward her but kept his distance. "We need to talk about last night." Alice raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You want to discuss the fact that you saw me at a restaurant waiting for someone who never showed up?" Victor took a deep breath. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me, because, from where I stand, it seems pretty straightforward." Alice shot back, her frustration evident in her voice. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "Alice, there's something you need to know. I'm Ethan." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Alice blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "What?" she finally murmured, her voice filled with disbelief. "I'm Ethan, the man you've been chatting with every night." Alice took a step back, shaking her head. "No, that doesn't make sense. Ethan is kind, thoughtful, and you're a demanding, difficult boss?" Victor finished with a sad smile. Alice crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the ground as she tried to piece everything together. "Why did you do this? Why hide behind another name?" Victor took another step forward, but kept his voice calm. "When I started using the app, I didn't expect to meet someone like you. I wanted a real connection without the expectations that come with my name." Alice looked up, her eyes filled with anger and hurt. "And now? You want me to just accept this as if it's normal?" Victor sighed. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I needed to be honest with you." Alice felt a lump in her throat. Part of her wanted to shout, but another part couldn't ignore all the conversations they had shared. "Why now? Why decide to tell me this right now?" Victor looked directly at her, his eyes showing a vulnerability Alice had never seen before. "Because I can't keep living this lie, and honestly, I don't want to lose the connection we have." Alice turned her gaze away, struggling to hold back tears. "I need time," she said finally. Victor nodded, respecting her decision. "Okay, I understand." In the following days, the tension between the two of them grew. At the office, Alice barely looked at Victor, and he kept his distance, giving her the space she had asked for. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights reflecting on everything she had learned. Despite feeling betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Ethan, or rather Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while reviewing project sketches, she received a message. "Can I call? It's Ethan, or Victor. I don't even know what to call you anymore." Alice hesitated for a moment but replied, "Sure." The phone rang and she answered. "Hey," said Victor, his voice soft and careful. "What do you want?" Alice asked, still defensive. "I just want to know how you're doing." She laughed without humor. How do you think I'm doing? Confused, angry, not sure if I can trust you? Victor sighed on the other end of the line. I understand. And I know it's not fair to ask anything right now, but I just want you to know I never lied about how I feel. Alice closed her eyes, letting the silence speak for her. It's hard to believe you, Victor. I know, and I'm willing to prove it if you give me a chance. Alice took a deep breath before responding. We'll see. The next morning, Alice arrived at the office determined to focus on work. However, when she entered the meeting room, she found an envelope on her desk. Inside, there was a handwritten letter from Victor. Alice, I know words aren't enough, but I want you to know how much our conversations have meant to me. If you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But please know that everything I've done has been because I admire you, both as a person and as a professional. Victor. Alice read the letter several times, trying to figure out how she felt. Later, during a break, she ran into Sarah, who noticed the strange atmosphere. Something wrong? Sarah asked. No, just personal stuff, Alice replied. Sarah smiled. Well, I hope things get better. You deserve it. Alice thanked her and went back to work, but Victor's letter stayed on her mind. That night, as Alice was leaving the office, she found Victor waiting in the lobby. He looked tense but determined. Can I walk you out? He asked. Alice hesitated, but eventually agreed. As they walked in silence, Victor finally broke the ice. Thank you for reading my letter. Alice looked at him, surprised. How do you know I read it? Victor gave a slight smile. I figured you'd be too curious to ignore it. Alice sighed, still confused about what to do. Victor, this is all so complicated. He nodded. I know, but I'm willing to simplify things if you'll let me. Alice stopped, staring at him. This won't be easy. I don't expect it to be, he said sincerely. Alice looked down, her heart torn between anger and the desire to give him another chance. Then prove it's worth it. Victor smiled faintly, seeing a small opening to regain her trust. The following days were filled with tension at the office, but something subtle had changed. Victor continued to observe Alice from a distance, careful not to invade the space she clearly needed. Alice, in turn, focused entirely on her work, using her dedication as a distraction from her conflicting thoughts. On Monday, the design department met to present the latest project updates. Alice, more confident, led the presentation with ease. As she explained the changes, Victor watched in silence, taking note of every detail. When she finished, he stood and publicly praised her. Excellent work, Miss Harper. This is the kind of innovation we expect at Campbell Innovations. Alice was surprised, but maintained her composure, responding only with a brief, "Thank you, Mr. Campbell." After the meeting, Sarah pulled her aside with a mischievous smile. Looks like the boss is finally recognizing you. Maybe he just wants the project delivered on time? Alice replied, avoiding eye contact. Oh, sure. And I'm the next CEO of the company, Sarah joked, laughing as she walked away. Alice shook her head but couldn't ignore the slight blush on her face. Later that week, Victor asked Alice to review a set of layouts before the final presentation to investors. I need this on my desk by tomorrow morning, he said, handing her the files. Alice nodded, but as she reviewed the documents, she realized she'd need to stay late to make everything perfect. Around 9 p.m., still at the office, Alice heard footsteps approaching. It was Victor, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, he said, placing a cup on her desk. Alice looked at him, surprised but accepted the coffee. Thank you. Victor pulled up a chair and sat beside her, observing her work. It's coming along well, he commented in a softer tone than usual. Alice didn't respond immediately, but finally asked, Why are you here so late? Victor gave a faint smile. Because I want this project to succeed. And maybe I wanted to see how you're doing. Alice's heart raced, but she kept her eyes fixed on the screen. I'm fine, just tired. Victor watched her silently for a moment before saying, If you need anything, I'll be in my office. Alice nodded without turning around, but as soon as he left, she let out a deep sigh, trying to control the conflicting emotions that arose whenever they were alone. The next morning, Alice delivered the revised layouts before the investor meeting. Victor reviewed every detail while the rest of the team waited in silence. Excellent work, Miss Harper. This is exactly what we were looking for, he finally said. Alice felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. Hearing Victor praise her publicly made all the effort worthwhile. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice complied, maintaining a professional demeanor. "I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication. This project wouldn't be where it is without you," Victor said sincerely. Alice searched his face for any sign of insincerity but found only honesty in his eyes. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Campbell. I know that. But I want you to know your work is appreciated," he replied. Alice nodded, but as she stood to leave, Victor said something unexpected. "I'm still willing to prove I can be someone you can trust." Alice froze for a moment, then said, "Then keep proving it." That evening, Alice confided in Sarah as they left the office. "He seems to be trying, don't you think?" Sarah asked. Alice sighed, hesitant. "Maybe, but it's not something that can be fixed overnight." "That's true. But who knows? Maybe he really deserves a chance." Alice didn't respond. She knew she needed more time to process everything. A few days later, Victor surprised Alice with an unexpected invitation. "Alignment meeting with the client. I need you to join me." Alice frowned as she read the message but accepted. On the day of the meeting, they went together to the venue, a discreet restaurant downtown. During the meeting, Victor displayed impressive confidence, but also gave Alice the space to present her ideas. The client was impressed, and Alice felt she was beginning to earn everyone's respect. "You did very well today," Victor said as they walked back to the car. "Thank you. It was a great opportunity," Alice replied. Victor looked at her, his tone serious. "You have more than just talent, Alice. You have the potential to be a leader." Alice felt a tightness in her chest at the compliment, but tried to keep her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Campbell." On the drive back to the office, the silence between them was comfortable, yet full of unspoken meaning. Alice was starting to see that behind Victor's demanding exterior was someone willing to improve and make up for past mistakes. That night, she received a message from Ethan. "How was your day?" Alice took a while to reply, but finally typed, "Better than I expected." Ethan responded quickly, "I'm happy for you." Alice smiled slightly, feeling that for the first time in days, the tension was beginning to ease. The next morning, Alice found another handwritten note on her desk. "Alice, I know there's still a lot to prove, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust. Thank you for being patient. Victor." Alice held the letter for a few seconds before putting it away in the drawer. Maybe, just maybe, he really was changing. The atmosphere at the office was starting to improve, but for Victor, the storm was still coming. That morning, during a meeting, he received an unexpected message from his mother, Evelyn Campbell. "We need to talk. I'll be in your office in an hour." Victor sighed, already predicting what was to come. Evelyn had never been comfortable with the idea of him being single, and recently her insistence on finding him the perfect wife had become unbearable. Exactly an hour later, Evelyn entered the office, impeccable as always, but with a serious look on her face. "Victor, we need to talk about your priorities." He leaned back in his chair, keeping his tone calm. "And what would those be, according to you?" "Your personal life. It's unacceptable that a man in your position doesn't have a wife by his side. I've already selected a few options." Victor rubbed his temples, feeling his patience starting to run thin. "Mom, we've talked about this. I don't need you picking someone for me." Evelyn ignored his objection and placed a folder on the desk. "Here are the profiles. Jennifer Vanderbilt is an excellent choice. Young, well-mannered, comes from a respectable family." Victor pushed the folder back. "I'm not interested." "Then who? That designer who works for you?" Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "I've heard some rumors." Victor remained calm, but his gaze hardened. "Alice Harper is an exemplary employee, and I don't want you interfering in professional matters." Evelyn let out a short laugh. "Professional? Don't be naive, Victor. You're exposing yourself, and this could ruin your reputation." Victor stood up, ending the conversation. "Mom, I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Evelyn stared at him for a few seconds before leaving, but made it clear that the topic was far from over. Meanwhile, Alice felt the weight of the rumors starting to circulate at the office. Whispers about her closeness with Victor began, and she did her best to ignore them. Sarah noticed her tension and tried to ease the mood. "Don't pay attention to them. If they're talking about you, It's because they're threatened by your talent." Alice smiled faintly, but Sarah's words didn't erase her concern. That night, Victor sent Alice a message, asking to meet after work. "We need to talk." Rooftop, 6 p.m. Alice hesitated, but ended up going. When she arrived, she found Victor waiting, his face tense. "Is something wrong?" she asked, cautious. "My mom came by today. She insinuated some things that could complicate our situation." Alice frowned. "What did she say?" Victor sighed. "She thinks our closeness could be used against us. She wants me to distance myself from you." Alice felt a mix of anger and frustration. "So that's it? You're going to give in?" "No, but I need you to be aware that this could become a problem." Alice crossed her arms, staring at him. "I've dealt with tough situations before. I'm not going to give up my work because of rumors." Victor smiled slightly, admiring her determination. "And that's exactly why I believe in you." Alice looked away, still struggling with conflicting emotions but feeling like, in some way, they were both in the same battle. The following days were a mix of tension and progress. Alice immersed herself in her work, while Victor, still dealing with the pressures from Evelyn, tried to stay calm and focused. But both of them knew the situation couldn't continue indefinitely without a resolution. Victor, determined to show Alice that he was committed to being honest and making up for his mistakes, started planning a gesture that could prove his intentions. He knew words wouldn't be enough. He needed actions that would show her how much she meant to him. On Friday, Alice arrived at the office early, only to find a folder on her desk. Inside were detailed documents about a new project, a graphic design app for freelancers, something she had always dreamed of developing. Along with the documents, there was a note from Victor. "Alice, this project is yours. I want you to lead it with full autonomy. I believe in your talent and want you to know that you'll always have my support. Victor." Alice was frozen. She read the note several times, trying to absorb the meaning. A project of her own? This was more than just an opportunity. It was a demonstration of trust and a step that could define her career. Later, during the meeting, Victor formally announced the project and introduced Alice as the leader. "Miss Harper has shown exceptional talent, and I trust she will lead this project with excellence," he said, his tone firm and confident. Alice felt all eyes on her but kept her composure. "Thank you for your confidence, Mr. Campbell. I'll do my best." After the meeting, Sarah approached her with a smile. "You deserve this, Alice. It's amazing to see someone's hard work being recognized." Alice thanked her, but deep down, she was still processing Victor's gesture. He truly seemed determined to prove that he trusted her and valued her work. That evening, while Alice was reviewing the project details, she received a message from Ethan. "Can I call you?" She hesitated, but replied, "Yes." When she answered, she heard Victor's voice, gentle, yet filled with emotion. "Alice, I just wanted to thank you for taking the lead on this project. I know things have been complicated, but I want you to know I'm here if you need anything." Alice took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. "Thank you, Victor. And thank you for trusting me." There was a brief pause before Victor responded. "I've always trusted you." The next day, Alice and Victor worked together on the final investor presentation. They spent hours fine-tuning details and discussing ideas. For the first time in weeks, the tension between them seemed to ease. During a break, Victor offered Alice a cup of coffee. "This seems to be becoming a habit," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "A habit I don't mind keeping," he replied with a faint smile. Alice couldn't help but smile back. She felt that little by little, the barriers between them were starting to fall. At the end of the day, Victor walked her to the elevator. "Thank you for your effort today. You did an excellent job." "Thank you, Mr. Campbell." Victor hesitated for a moment, but before the elevator doors closed, he said, "Alice, I'm willing to wait for as long as you need." Alice remained silent, but his words echoed in her mind as the elevator descended. As the project progressed, Alice and Victor began interacting more frequently. Although they tried to keep their conversations strictly professional, every glance and gesture seemed to carry an emotional weight that was impossible to ignore. The atmosphere at the office felt heavy, yet it was filled with possibilities. Alice was determined to prove her worth, not just to Victor, but to herself. Leading this project was the opportunity she had been waiting for. and she refused to let conflicting feelings interfere with her performance. One day, while reviewing a detailed progress report, Alice received a notification from Ethan. "Can we talk tonight?" She hesitated for a few seconds before replying, "Yes, I need to sort some things out." Though she still felt hurt, Alice knew she needed clarity. Whatever was happening between her and Victor, or Ethan, had reached a point where keeping everything bottled up would only make things worse. Let's play a little game for those who read the comments. Type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. Later that afternoon, Victor sent a formal message requesting a meeting outside the office to discuss the project's progress. Alice found it odd but agreed. He scheduled the meeting at a quiet, private restaurant, which only piqued her curiosity further. When she arrived at the restaurant, Alice found Victor already seated at the table, his posture rigid, but his eyes betraying a certain vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing to greet her. "I thought it was important," Alice replied, trying to maintain a professional tone, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. They sat down and the waiter brought the menus, but neither seemed interested in eating. After a brief silence, Victor finally spoke. "Alice, before we discuss the project, I need to clear up a few things." She crossed her arms, waiting. "I lied about who I was when we started talking, but every word, every feeling I shared with you as Ethan was real. None of it was planned, and I'm sorry for causing so much confusion." Alice studied him, her eyes searching his expression for any hint of insincerity. "You put me in a difficult position, Victor, but at the same time, I can't deny how much our conversations meant to me." Victor nodded, his gaze steady, filled with an honesty Alice found hard to ignore. "I never wanted it to happen this way. But honestly, I never imagined I'd meet someone like you." The silence that followed was almost tangible, heavy with emotions neither of them could fully articulate. Finally, Alice took a deep breath and asked, "So what happens now?" Victor leaned slightly forward, his voice low but steady. "I want to be honest with you from now on, always. I want us to build something real, but I understand it will take time." Alice felt the weight of his words and realized that, despite everything, there was still a part of her that wanted to believe. "This will require a lot of effort, Victor. Trust isn't rebuilt easily." "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," he responded without hesitation. In the following days, their relationship began to change. The interactions at the office became more natural, less forced. Victor made sure to show constant support for Alice's work, while she, in turn, started to lower her guard. During one of the final project reviews, Alice finally asked something that had been on her mind. "Why did you choose to give me this project?" Victor smiled faintly, his eyes locked on hers. "Because I trust your talent, and I wanted you to know that." Alice felt her cheeks blush slightly, but kept her composure. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." When the big day arrived and the project was presented to the investors, the success was immediate. Everyone was impressed with the innovative concept, and Victor made sure to publicly highlight Alice's role. "This project is a reflection of Alice Harper's talent and dedication. We couldn't have achieved this result without her," he declared. Alice received the compliments with humility, but couldn't help feeling a deep sense of pride in herself. After the presentation, Victor asked her to talk privately. "Alice, I know things between us have been complicated, but I want you to know that I'm here, ready to make this work, if you want to." Alice sighed, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "I want that too, Victor. But we need to take it slow." Victor nodded, accepting the condition with a genuine smile. In the following days, Alice and Victor began to build a new kind of relationship, one based on honesty and mutual respect. Despite the challenges, both were willing to face whatever came their way. One evening, while walking through the park, Victor took Alice's hand and said, "I never imagined that a profile on a dating app would change my life this much." Alice chuckled softly. "And I never imagined my boss would be the man who makes me laugh every night." They stopped, and Victor pulled her into a hug, the silence between them filled with unspoken promises. "The important thing is that we've found our way, together," he said. Alice smiled, finally feeling like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days leading up to the official completion of the project were exhausting but rewarding. Alice threw herself entirely into her work, and Victor, always nearby, followed every step with meticulous attention. Success was palpable, and the final presentation would be the moment that solidified all their efforts. That Friday morning, the entire team gathered in the large conference room at Campbell Innovations. The investors waited eagerly as Alice made the final adjustments to the material that would be presented. Victor walked through the room, briefly speaking with some team members, but his eyes frequently met Alice's, as if silently offering reassurance. When the moment for the presentation arrived, Alice took a deep breath and walked to the stage. The spotlight illuminated her face, but her posture was firm. She began outlining the key points of the project, explaining each detail with clarity and passion. Victor watched from the side, impressed. He knew Alice was talented, but at that moment, she seemed unbeatable. Every word she spoke captivated the audience, and when the presentation ended, the applause filled the room. "Excellent work, Miss Harper," Victor said as he approached her after the meeting, his tone professional, but his eyes revealing something deeper. "You exceeded all expectations." Alice felt her face heat up but kept her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Campbell. It was a team effort." Victor smiled, satisfied. Later that day, he gathered the whole team for a small celebration on the company's rooftop. The panoramic view of the city provided the perfect backdrop for a toast to success. "I want to thank everyone for their tireless effort on this project," Victor began, raising his glass. "But I would like to give a special thank you to Alice Harper. Her leadership and creativity were crucial." Everyone toasted, and Alice, though surprised by the spotlight, felt genuinely proud. Sarah, who was standing next to her, whispered, "He doesn't hide how much he admires you, and honestly, who doesn't?" Alice chuckled softly, but her mind was elsewhere. When the party ended, Victor approached Alice as she gathered her things. "Do you have a minute?" he asked in a softer tone. Alice hesitated for a moment but nodded. "Sure." Victor led her to the rooftop, now empty but still illuminated by the city lights. He stopped near the railing and turned to face her. "Alice, I need to be honest. I've been thinking a lot about us." She crossed her arms, her heart racing. "And what have you concluded?" Victor took a deep breath before answering. "I want us to know exactly where we stand. I don't want there to be any doubts or misunderstandings between us." Alice remained silent, processing his words. "I've been thinking too," she said finally. "But there's still a lot I need to work through." Victor nodded, respecting the time she needed. "That's okay. I just want you to know I'm here, and I'm willing to wait." In the days that followed, Alice and Victor maintained a balanced working relationship, but the emotional tension between them never fully disappeared. They both knew that, eventually, they'd need to address their feelings. One day, Victor sent Alice a message. "I need to show you something important. Meet me tomorrow night at this address." Alice read the message with curiosity and a twinge of anxiety. The next evening, she arrived at a small yet elegant restaurant with an intimate atmosphere. Victor was already there, waiting for her. "What's so important?" Alice asked as she sat down. Victor gave a faint smile, but his eyes were serious. "I want you to see another side of me." Alice raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but before she could ask more, Victor began speaking about his personal life. He shared the pressures he'd faced from a young age, the constant need to prove himself, and how he had avoided opening up to meaningful relationships for years. "And then you came along," he said, looking directly at her. "You challenged me in ways no one else ever has." Alice felt a mix of emotions, but held his gaze steadily. "And what do you expect from me now, Victor?" He hesitated for a moment before replying. "I hope we can build something real. No masks, no secrets." Alice took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his sincerity. "That takes time. And trust. I'm willing to wait and earn your trust, day by day." The dinner ended with a sense of relief for both of them. For the first time, they felt they were on the right path, even though they knew there was still a long way to go. In the weeks that followed, Alice and Victor found a balance between work and their personal lives. They began spending time together outside the office, sharing simple yet meaningful moments, walks in the park, quiet dinners, even movie nights at Alice's apartment. One day, during a walk, Victor stopped abruptly and looked at her. "Alice, have you ever wondered how things might have been if we'd met differently?" she laughed softly. I think it would have been less complicated. Victor smiled, but there was seriousness in his expression. Maybe. But I believe everything happened the way it was meant to. Alice looked at him, feeling that, despite the challenges, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next evening, Victor surprised her with dinner at his apartment. He had carefully prepared everything, from the food to the music playing in the background. I didn't know you could cook, Alice said, impressed. I know a few things, he replied, pouring her a glass of wine. Throughout the evening, the conversation flowed naturally, and Alice felt the barriers between them finally beginning to disappear. Alice, I want you to know that I'm fully committed to this, to you, Victor said, taking her hand. Alice smiled, feeling more secure than ever. And I'm committed too. As time went on, they began making plans together. Though they kept things steady, both knew they were building something solid. At the conclusion of a major corporate event, Victor made an unexpected announcement. I'd like to take this moment to thank everyone again for their incredible work. But personally, I want to thank someone special who has helped me grow, not just as a leader, but as a person. Alice Harper, you've changed my life. Alice was speechless, but the applause and smiles from her colleagues encouraged her. After the event, Victor took her on a quiet walk under the stars. You know, I never imagined things would turn out like this, he said thoughtfully. Neither did I, but I'm glad they did, Alice replied, holding his hand. They stopped and looked at each other for a long moment before Victor said, Alice, I have something for you. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. This isn't a proposal, not yet. But I want this to symbolize what we're building together. Alice felt the tears roll down her cheeks as she smiled and accepted the ring. Thank you, Victor. They hugged, and the world around them seemed to disappear. The following months were filled with peaceful and happy moments. Alice and Victor had found the perfect balance, both at work and in their personal lives. Their relationship evolved naturally, and the love they shared grew stronger each day. Victor, ever the observer, began planning something special. He knew Alice was a unique woman, and for a marriage proposal, nothing less than extraordinary would be enough. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked, Alice, what are your favorite places in the world? Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical. Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening. But in his mind, the plan was already taking shape. 2 months later, Victor surprised her with a trip. Let's take some time off from work, just the two of us. Alice was delighted by the idea, but Victor kept the destination a secret until the moment of departure. When they arrived in Santorini, Alice was speechless. Victor, did you really bring us here? You deserve the best, he said with a satisfied smile. In the following days, they explored the island, but Victor was waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, one evening, he took her to a special dinner at a restaurant located on a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, creating a magical atmosphere. After dinner, as they walked along the terrace, Victor stopped and held Alice's hands. Alice, you've changed my life in a way I never imagined. You've shown me that true love exists and that I can be a better person. Alice smiled, her eyes shining. Victor, he then kneeled, pulling a small box from his pocket. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me? Alice felt the tears fall as she nodded in agreement. Yes, of course, yes. Victor placed the ring on her finger and pulled her into a hug as applause echoed around them. The entire restaurant had witnessed that special moment. A few months later, in a beautiful flower-filled garden, Alice and Victor got married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. Alice wore an elegant yet simple dress, while Victor, in a perfectly tailored suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. You look amazing, he whispered when she arrived at the altar. And you look perfect, Alice replied, emotional. The ceremony was full of love and sincere promises. As they exchanged vows, both knew they were starting a new journey together, having already overcome the toughest challenges. When the officiant declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Victor kissed her tenderly, and the sound of clapping and laughter filled the garden. At the reception, while everyone celebrated, Alice and Victor shared a quiet moment alone under the stars. "You know, I never imagined my life would take this turn," Alice said, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I never imagined I would find love in such an unlikely place," Victor replied, holding her hand. They stood in silence for a few minutes, enjoying the moment. "From now on, it's you and me, together in everything," Victor said. Alice smiled. "Always." And so the journey that began with a message exchange on a dating app turned into a true love story, showing that even the most unexpected paths can lead to happy endings. What did you think of Alice and Victor's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to follow all of our stories, and feel free to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the final screen.